Hello and hello. It is the morning after a very rainy April night. I am seriously beginning to regret my choice of filming location for this video. And I am in a very muddy field in Germany. Because this was the location of what I think would have been the ultimate gadget barn. The gadgetiest gadget barn of all time. The Goat. Here is what the same field looked like in the mid-1970s. What we're looking at is the test track of the world's first double-sided monorail, and that was only the start of what it could do. You want your own personal pod vehicle? You've got one. You want to choose what route it takes? You can. You need a larger vehicle for all your friends and family? Yep, you can do that too. So, what is this thing? Welcome to the transport system that could do almost everything, except still exist. This is the Kabinentaxi. So let's start at the beginning. What was Germany doing building a monorail in a field? Well, we're talking about Germans here, so it was in fact a very logical decision. In the early 1970s, the West German government had decided there were too many cars clogging up their roads, and they wanted to experiment with potential new transport ideas that could help alleviate the problem. One of those ideas was the Kabinentaxi. And I don't know why they chose this particular, fairly unremarkable field to build the test track in. But to be fair, it's about the right sort of size for a decent sized test track. It has great transport links, making it very easy to bring in all the construction materials, and we're in a part of the country that is famous for producing iron and steel. So again, pretty logical stuff from the Germans there. And in 1973, a small section of track was ready, and the first tests could begin. The Kabinentaxi, or in English, cabin taxi, was a slightly confusing name for something that was a little bit like a taxi, but quite a lot like a monorail. The pod-sized cabin vehicles ran on a central guide rail made from a single steel beam, and they could run either on top of the rail, or below the rail, or in their real party piece, above and below the same rail at the same time. So, why would you want to be able to do that? Or perhaps, why wouldn't you? Well, on this channel, we've already talked quite a lot about Germany's love of suspended monorails. And as you know, they do have some advantages. They're significantly cheaper than building an equivalent underground railway, and they take up much less space on the surface than a tram line or a conventional railway. The Kabinentaxi just takes that idea to the next level. It's even cheaper, because you only need one track for both directions, and it uses even less space, because you only need one track for both directions. In a large open field, that didn't really matter, of course, but in an urban environment, for example a narrow street lined with trees, it could be a serious advantage, allowing bi-directional travel in places few other modes of transport could. Oh, just seen this. Unauthorised access to the facility is forbidden. Visitors, please use gate 2. Ah, okay. Guess I'm using gate 2 then. Now that sign is still there from when testing started in 1973, and it began with a single station and a simple loop of track. But by 1978, a bit like the train set you had when you were a kid, there were now 3 stations, some sidings, a branch line and a second loop, plus a separate test track for a spin-off technology called Kabinenlift. And those were not the only developments. The original concept of the Kabinentaxi was that you could rock up at a station, select where you wanted to go, and then a little 3-seater cabin would arrive to take you straight there. In that sense, it was a bit like a taxi. Just a taxi that could only go to places that were on the track. And who am I to say perhaps that wasn't the great idea they thought it was? But within a few years, they'd already started experimenting with much larger capacity vehicles that operated more like a bus or a tram, and launched a rebrand from Kabinentaxi to Seebahn. or in other words, from cabin taxi to cabin railway. And plans were made to mix in various other sizes of passenger cabin and even some freight cabins, but none of these designs made it further than the drawing board. So this is Gate 2, what would have been the visitor entrance. And during the days of testing, I guess we're talking hundreds, possibly thousands of people would have come through here to take a ride on the Kabinentaxi. Those tests ran for a total of 6 years, making this one of the most thoroughly tested tests ever to be thoroughly tested. And by the end, the engineers had managed to reduce the gap between moving vehicles down to 1.9 seconds, a stopping distance that would be quite close between two road vehicles, never mind on a railway. They had created something here that was not only technologically very impressive, it was proven to be reliable, and it was proven to be safe. And now they were ready to go out and sell it to cities all over the world. There was just one problem. No one bought it. They did come close though. At one point, the company behind Kabinentaxi was in serious discussions with the city of Hamburg, and over on the other side of the Atlantic, the city of Detroit. And who knows what could have been if either of those projects had gone ahead. But unfortunately, they didn't. First, Kabinentaxi pulled out of the running in Detroit in order to concentrate on Hamburg, and then in 1979, the West German government announced wide-ranging spending cuts, which meant the project lost all public funding. The company continued to do their best to push the contract through with Hamburg, but since the city had just seen their budgets cut too, the deal ended up collapsing, and before long, they simply ran out of money. A couple of years later, in July 1981, the entire test site was dismantled, cleaned away, and allowed to return to farmland. And the only sign of what was once here is quite literally a sign. That one, over there. However, what happened to all the little cabins is another question. Apparently, at least one of them ended up in someone's back garden and survives to this day as a novelty tool shed. Perhaps a fitting ending for the world's most gadgety gadget barn. And if you'd like to know more about the Kabinentaxi, there is a fantastic website called Gleismann's Bahnhof, which goes into way more detail about the story and how the system worked. It is in German, but I'll put a link in the description anyway. And we've now reached the part of the video where I normally tell you how to get here, but it really is just a muddy field. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.